Welcome everyone, this is our session 12. Terry and Paul here. Let's dive right back in.
Let's do it. We left off last time with letter number...
It was 15, wasn't it?
15, a long letter. And Sinnett was getting ready to leave within a few days for London with his wife and son. And KH was giving him some last-minute advice. And the last part of it was warning him against a skunk, an acquaintance of Lord Lindsay, who Sinnett intended to visit while he was in London. And he said, this guy, you need to watch out for him. His name is Hume, spelled H-O-M-E, but pronounced Hume also. And he was a medium, but he was a criticizer of both Alcott and HPB, and he wasn't very ethical. So he said, even though Lord Lindsay is enthralled with this guy, don't believe that he's the nice person that he portrays himself to be. Now we're on letter 16. Now that last letter was written sometime before February 20th, 1881. This next letter, number 16, was received at Gala, Ceylon, Sri Lanka, on March 1st, 1881. So Sinnett had traveled, I believe, from Allahabad, where he lived, to Bombay. Ships in those days almost always made a stop at Ceylon before leaving to go to London or wherever they were going in Europe.
So leaving India, they'd stop, and Ceylon is currently named what?
Sri Lanka.
But the name Ceylon it's not called Ceylon anymore, is it?
No. Ceylon is what it was called during the British rule. After the British were kicked out, they changed a lot of the names of countries. Siam became Thailand. India, of course, didn't change names, but many of the cities did, like Bombay became Mumbai, etc., etc. What is now Chennai used to be called Madras. KH had been very careful not to bother HPB. Remember, she's really sick. And so he sent, through normal means, a letter to Alcott, who was in Sri Lanka, and he said, please make sure that Sinnett gets this when he's passing through there. So he avoided HPB completely so that she wouldn't be involved in this transaction. And so when he arrived in Sri Lanka, he was given this letter. And go ahead.
So this is letter number 16. My dear ambassador, to quiet the anxiety I see lurking within your mind, and which has even a more definite form than you have expressed, let me say that I will use my best endeavors to calm our highly sensitive, not always sensible old friend, and make her stop at her post.
Stop, by the way, in those days meant stay, to remain. So whenever you hear somebody saying they were stopping at such and such, means we would say today they stayed there.
Ill health resulting from natural causes and mental anxiety have made her nervous to an extreme degree and sadly impaired her usefulness to us. For a fortnight past, she has been all but useless, and her emotions have sped along her nerves like electricity. Oops, flip 2 pages at once. Like electricity through a telegraphic wire. All has been chaos. I am sending these few lines by a friend to Alcott so that they may be forwarded without her knowledge. Consult freely with our friends in Europe and return with a good book in your hand and a good plan in your head. Encourage the sincere brethren at Gala to persevere in their work of education. Some cheering words from you will give them heart. Telegraph to Nicholas Diaz, Inspector of Police at Gale, that you, a member of the General Council of the Theosophical Society, are coming, mentioning the date and ship, and I will cause HPB to do the same to another person. Think on the way of your true friend, KH and...
blank. There's actually a blank on the letter, and we don't know if that's DK or if it's Moria or who it might be. So there are a few mysteries that come in every once in a while. We'll learn about another one soon enough.
All right.
Letter number 17 was the only letter that Sinnett received while he was in London for the month that he was there. And the letter came by post from France. So there never was an explanation of how that transpired. So there's always speculation by the researchers who investigate all of these things. Is there an adept in France that they're in touch with? Did KH transmit this telepathically to either an adept or a chela in France, and then that person mailed it? No one knows for sure. But it did come by mail. And
all right.
Let me just mention,
Sure.
The first thing he says is that he's writing from an unknown valley amid the steep crags and glaciers of Terek Mir. Now, Terek Mir is the highest mountain in the Hindu Kush range of the Himalaya mountains. So I couldn't find any monastery in that area, so we have no idea exactly what he was doing there. But the mountain itself is more than 25,000 feet high.
Wow.
And he was in a valley somewhere, obviously not at the top, but somewhere near that.
There might be a monastery that's just not
There
public,
could
maybe.
be, yes. Yeah. And it's possible that there was one at the time, but not now. I wasn't able to find that.
Letter number 17. It is from the depths of an unknown valley amid the steep crags and glaciers of the Terek Mir, a vale never trodden by European foot since the day its parent mount was itself breathed out from within our Mother Earth's bosom.
The mountain, by the way, is in, let's see, well, the mountain range is mostly in Afghanistan, but this particular mount, Terek Mir, is in current-day Pakistan.
That your friend sends you these lines. For it is there that KH received your, quote, affectionate homages, and there he intends passing his, quote, summer vacations.
Now he's being silly there because adepts don't get vacations.
Don't take vacations. A letter from the abodes of eternal snow and purity sent to and received, quote, at the abodes of vice.
Which would be London.
Okay. Would I rather be there with you? No. But I was at several different times at other places, though not in astral or in any other tangible form, but simply in thought.
So remember, in the past, he has sometimes listened in on conversations, so obviously he projected his consciousness there one way or another. Here he's saying, no, I didn't actually visit you by any of these means, but I did think about you.
Isn't it curious how he's saying, how he's considering astral a tangible form?
Right.
To us, it's not tangible at all, but to those who are familiar with raising our consciousness, even the astral plane is stuff.
Everything below the absolute
Atma,
spiritual
sure.
is tangible.
Stuff.
Yes.
It's interesting how he's making that. Doesn't that satisfy you? Well, you know the limitations I am subjected to in your case, and you must have patience. Your future book is a little jewel, and small and tiny as it is, it may, one day, be found to soar as high as Mount Everest over your Shimla hills. In the wild jungle of spiritualistic literature, it shall undoubtedly prove the redeemer, with a capital R, offered as a sacrifice for the sin of the world of spiritualists. Now, is he referring to like a Jesus type of redeemer?
No,
Redeemer.
He's saying that you can restore people's confidence in them, or
Okay. Oh, you did mention in our last session that a lot of times in Old English they're capitalizing nouns that really aren't proper nouns.
Right.
That's one of these cases.
It's meant to show that it's like an emphasis on that particular word.
Okay, got it. They will begin by rejecting, nay, vilifying it, but it will find its faithful 12. Oh, that's interesting. Faithful 12, like the disciples.
Yeah, we know he often refers to the Bible, so yeah, that's a subtle reference to the 12 apostles.
The seed thrown by your hand into the soil of speculation will not grow up as a weed. So far it may be promised. It is a spirited and discriminative little memoir.
Now, how does he know that?
Well, he can clearly. So is it written though? Has it been written yet or no?
Yes, it has. Actually, it's almost entirely written at this point.
He can project his consciousness.
Because he had a month to write it while he was on the ship. And so by the time he arrived, it was either completed or almost completed.
So he either projected his consciousness into the mind of Sinnett, or he witnessed the letter being, or the book being written somehow.
He knows exactly what's in it.
It is at this kind of springs that spiritualists ought to be compelled to slake their thirst for phenomena and mystic knowledge, instead of being left to swallow the idiotic gush they find in the banner of light and others. Only reason elevated to superconscious wisdom can furnish the key to unlock the mysteries to the intellect. Believe me, there comes a moment in the life of an adept when the hardships he has passed through are 1,000-fold rewarded. We've heard that multiple times now.
Yes, this was one of the things that we mentioned in our first couple of sessions, where we were giving people an insight, a little bit of a sneak preview of what was coming. And yes, this is one of those most important
it's also here.
Statements, yes.
For those who went onward, there's reward past all telling.
Exactly. And so he's now explaining what the reward will be.
Let's hear it. I'm eager to see it. In order to acquire further knowledge, he has no more to go through a minute and slow process of investigation and comparison of various objects, but is accorded an instantaneous, implicit insight into every first truth.
So they don't have to go to the library or even online to research a particular topic. The adepts don't have to. If they want to absorb information, one of the first things they can do is tap into the minds and the brains of their pupils. And they have access to everything that they know, and vice versa, to the extent that the pupil is able to access that.
I'd love to make a reference for our viewers to the Yoga Sutras. Many of our viewers know that I'm an amateur scholar of the Yoga Sutras, and we study in the third chapter. We've referenced this several times. The third chapter of the Yoga Sutras is where many of the siddhis, or special powers, are introduced by Patanjali that are accessible to every human if we learn how to eradicate the ego and learn to focus the mind intently on one object. And this process is described in the third chapter of the Yoga Sutras. When meditation or samadhi, sometimes it's referred to as samyama, which there's slight differences. When samyama or samadhi is practiced on one object, there is somewhat of a merging of the practitioner's consciousness with the object, whether the object is another person, a computer, a flower, and knowledge is gained immediately of whatever object it is.
That's exactly what it's describing.
Exactly, and Patanjali teaches us that. And it all starts with learning to focus and breathe and get your mind calm.
Yeah. So the good news is you don't have to read 5,000 books.
Right. That's amazing. Having passed that stage of philosophy which maintains that all fundamental truths have sprung from a blind impulse and left far behind him that other class of thinkers, the intellectuals or skeptics, who hold that fundamental truths are derived from the intellect alone, the adept sees and feels and lives in the very source of all fundamental truths, the universal spiritual essence of nature. Wow. Shiva, the creator, the destroyer, and the regenerator. He's getting deep.
Mm-hmm. Shiva has three functions. Creates things, destroys them, and regenerates. And as he explained before, I can't teach you new truths until you get rid of the old concepts that you're holding on to. You can't put new products into a contaminated container. So your mind has to be clear, it has to be pure, it has to be clean before I can teach you these concepts which are in many cases very foreign to you.
And therein lies one of the greatest obstacles for most of us. We hold too tight onto what we think is true, into our past beliefs.
Yes, we say many times, hold on to your beliefs very loosely. If they serve you, hold on to them as long as that is still useful. But the moment you find something that is more useful, be willing to let go of these old concepts, these old ideas. Never be afraid to say, I was wrong. I thought that a certain thing was a certain way, but now I have more information. I have more light on the subject. I understand it more clearly, and I was wrong about it
And
before.
I'm willing to bring in something new.
It's our
paradigm.
ego that doesn't let us let go of things.
Very much so. This is so interesting. I'd like to explore this last sentence just a little bit
go
more.
ahead.
He's saying that truths don't come from intellect alone. The fundamental truths do not come from intellect alone. The adept sees and feels and lives in the very source of the fundamental truths, which he's referring to as the universal spiritual essence of nature. What would we call that in more modern language? The universal spiritual essence of nature.
The universal mind?
Cosmic
maybe?
mind, universal
Cosmic
mind.
mind, yeah. That's why when people get this sudden increase in awareness, like Eckhart Tolle did, that's what he's kind of explaining here. Eckhart Tolle said he sat on a park bench for 2 years and just contemplated all of the marvelous things that he was experiencing.
Yeah, that's also what Jill Bolte Taylor describes when she had this severe aneurysm of her left hemisphere, and she was completely deficient of any left brain activity, and she was just right brain active. She couldn't move, she couldn't say her name, but yet she described cosmic consciousness.
Right. And by the way, she was a researcher on brain activity and neural
Yes.
activity.
Yes. I also find it interesting that he's assigning the three roles to Shiva alone, but there is a Trimurti, the Trinity in the Hindu culture, with Brahma being the creator and Vishnu being the regenerator. Vishnu is the sustainer and Shiva is the ushering in of the new, which means destroying of the old. It's interesting that he's assigning all three functions to Shiva consciousness.
Shiva is basically a builder. Before you can build something, you have to destroy whatever was occupying that location before, create a new surface on which to work, and then you can build something new and more modern and more useful.
As spiritualists of today have degraded, quote, spirit, so have the Hindus degraded nature by their anthropomorphic conceptions of it. Oh, that's a dig to the Hindu religion, kind of, because they have murtis, the personified deities, so many, like thousands of deities, right, with images and.
Remember that the whole intent of Buddhism was to bring a new wave of understanding to Hinduism. Hinduism had become very corrupted by the priests, the Brahmin priests. They were more interested in money than in anything else. And so when Buddha instituted what is now known as Buddhism.
It was supposed to be a reformation.
Exactly. It was to reform Hinduism. It's not that the original concept was bad. It's that so much junk had been added onto it that it was just weighted down with all of these additional rules and regulations and interpretations of various thousands of human beings.
Excuse me. Nature alone can incarnate the spirit of limitless contemplation. Absorbed in the absolute self-unconsciousness of physical self, plunged in the depths of true being, which is no being but eternal universal life. Let me read that again. Absorbed in the absolute self-unconsciousness of physical self, plunged in the depths of true being, which is no being but eternal universal life. His whole form as immovable and white as the eternal summits of snow in Kailasha, where he sits above care, above sorrow, above sin and worldliness, a mendicant, a sage, a healer, the king of kings, the yogi of yogis, end quote. Such is the ideal Shiva of Yoga Shastras, the culmination of spiritual wisdom. O ye Max Mullers and Monier Williamses, what have ye done with our philosophy? He's getting very prophetic, very Shakespearean here.
Yes. We'll find out later that he says, I very seldom write. And so since he now has an opportunity to use the English language,
he's letting it rip.
He does get a little carried away.
That's interesting. But you can hardly be expected to enjoy or even understand the above expounding of our teachings. Pardon me. I write letters seldom, and whenever compelled to do so, follow rather my own thoughts than holding strictly to the subject I ought to have in view. So you just admitted it. I have labored far more than a quarter of a century, night and day, to keep my place within the ranks of that invisible but ever busy army which labors and prepares for a task which can bring no reward but the consciousness that we are doing our duty to humanity. And meeting you on my way, I have tried to, not to enroll you, for that would be impossible, but to simply draw your attention, excite your curiosity, if not your better feelings, to the one and only truth. That was the longest sentence I've ever read.
So, those of the students who use the Mahatma Letters as a research object look for all of the little details. There are hundreds of Easter eggs, little hidden treasures within them. So when he said, I have labored for more than a quarter of a century, night and day, to keep my place within the ranks of that invisible but ever busy army which labors and prepares for a task which can bring no reward but the consciousness that we are doing our duty to humanity.
So 25 years he's been an adept? Is that what he's saying?
That's what everyone assumes. Okay. He's one of the younger ones.
Is that an incorrect assumption?
I don't think so, because remember, he attended university in Europe, more than one university.
So he attained adeptship in this lifetime?
Yes.
Even though he's currently, or at this time was probably over 100 some years old?
Not necessarily.
Oh, okay.
If he had attended university when he was in his 20s or 30s, he may only be 60 or so yet now. And the adepts, by the way, don't show any age.
Right.
Almost all of them look like they're in their prime of life. But he is one of the younger ones.
Mm-hmm. You proved faithful and true and have done your best. If your efforts will teach the world but one single letter from the alphabet of truth, that truth which once pervaded the whole world, your reward will not miss you. And now that you have met the, quote, mystics of Paris and London, what do you think of them? Yours, K.H. P.S. Our hapless old lady is sick. Liver, kidneys, head, brain, legs, every organ and limb shows fight and snaps its fingers at our efforts to ignore them. One of us will have to fix her, as our worthy Mr. Alcott says, or it will fare badly with her. They're going to fix her.
They fixed her several times.
Wow.
She was near death more than once. Before she wrote The Secret Doctrine, she was, again, in a very poor state of health.
Her natural constitution, regardless of this work, was just sickly, wasn't it?
No, it wasn't.
Not at all. Oh.
No. She was very strong.
So all of this
physically
is a direct result of this work.
Yeah. No, she had very good stamina and health when she was young, but it was diminished because of her work.
Did they warn her?
I'm sure they did. Mm-hmm. I'm quite sure she knew what she was signing up for. Mm-hmm. So that's the only letter that he received while he was in London. While he was there, he met many different people. And in this next letter, we're going to hear about some of them, because Sinnett was looking for recruits. Remember, the TS was not functioning all that well anywhere, including in London. So he was hoping to revive it, and K.H. also was hoping that Sinnett was going to be the tool, the instrument through which they would be able to cause this to happen. At some point in this time period, Sinnett had written a letter to K.H., but we have no idea how it was transmitted. K.H. had received it, and when Sinnett arrived on the ship to Bombay, he expected that a reply would be waiting for him, and he was very disappointed that there was no reply. But within a couple of days, he was one day sitting at a table with HPB. She was on one corner and he was on not far from her. They were just discussing, and out of thin air, an envelope fell onto the table. Just fell right in front of him. And it's a long letter, as we will see. It was at about 13 pages.
That's why it hadn't arrived yet, because it took a long time to scrap.
It probably right. That for that exact reason. So he did have his reply, and it was lengthy, and it is very full of information. Go ahead and let's start.
So now we're on letter number 18. And again, to our viewers, I know we've said this before, but we're cutting out quite a bit.
Oh, yes.
We're curating it down.
There's
a lot.
Still probably 50% of this that's cut out.
And I know that we've mentioned it before too, but Terry and I are reading from printed pages that Terry is typing. So you're transcribing.
Well, I don't actually type them.
Okay.
I'll explain the process.
Sure.
I go on the Theosophical Wiki page, where they have photographs of each letter, and then they have the transcription to the side of it. So I cut and paste from that into a Word document, make all of the adjustments and corrections for the cutting and pasting, and then that becomes my worksheet. From there, I copy that into our excerpts, and then I start cutting and rearranging and adding commas, adding periods, making it more understandable.
And that's how we arrive at this, because our viewers might be saying, well, why aren't they, what are they reading from?
Yeah, exactly.
Because the book is the book, but this is a highly curated, modified version.
And we still don't have it online yet, but we will have all of this material online so that people can read the same text that we're reading.
Would you consider that to be an abridged version, or?
Yeah, it would be a shortened Reader's Digest version. Now, this letter was received on July 8th. He had arrived at Sri Lanka on March 1st, and now he's back on July 8th to Bombay.
Welcome, good friend and brilliant author. Welcome back. I have your letter at hand, and I'm happy to see your personal experience with the, quote, elect of London proved so successful. But I foresee that more than ever now, you will become an incarnate question mark.
So, in other words, Sinnett had asked numerous questions, and he's like, okay, I can see now the questions are never going to end.
KH then says, beware. If your questions are found premature by the powers that be, instead of receiving my answers in their pristine purity, you may find them transformed into yards of a drivel.
Drivel is gibberish.
Okay.
But instead of yards of drivel, what did happen in several occasions is blank lines, something that had been written and were rubbed out, erased from the letter, and you can see those. So
this is his chiefs, as he refers to them,
possibly
are removing information.
Either KH, after the fact, removed them, or in transit, someone else removed them.
Moria might have stepped in and said...
Or the Mahachohan.
So why again? So is Sinnett just asking too many questions, or why?
Because already they're revealing information that is not divulged to the outer world.
Right, this is all very esoteric, for sure.
KH requested of the Mahachohan, would you allow me to do this? And the permission was given very, very reluctantly. And it was with a proviso. Yes, we will let you do it, but we're going to watch it carefully. And we'll see. And it may be cut off at any time. So they're very careful about this information being divulged to the wrong people. So
wow. Interesting.
Yes.
This is very interesting. And then he goes on to say, I am too far gone to feel a hand on my throat whenever digging into the limits of forbidden topics, but not enough to avoid feeling myself like a worm of yesterday before our, quote, rock of ages, my Chohan.
Chohan.
Oh, my Chohan.
This is the Tibetan spelling of Chohan.
So when he says he's too far gone, meaning he's been removed from society from a long time.
No, what he's saying is I'm so involved in this project that's going on that I'm kind of ignoring the restraints on me, and he says I'm probably going to feel the hand around my neck of the Chohan, but he's making light once again.
Now, where on earth is he quoting Rock of Ages from? Because this is in the 1800s.
Well, Rock of Ages is from the Bible.
Is it?
Yes.
I did not know that.
Of course.
What is Rock of Ages referring to?
Now you've got me there.
Well,
I think I think it means their religious philosophy that is the basis of all of their truths.
Okay.
This is the rock upon which we have built.
That's got to be it.
There was another thing too. Like a worm of yesterday. There was a saying that was popular at the time. A worm was someone who, up until a certain point, had been very faithful to a certain belief or cause, and then this person became kind of critical, or they started questioning things. So it's a person who stands out in an organization and isn't quite going along with the crowd anymore.
Okay. We must all be blindfolded before we can pass onward, or else we have to remain outside.
Now, what does that refer to? This is from the Masonic tradition, where the neophyte has to be blindfolded before they're brought into the temple of learning, so that they are what?
They can't see how to get there? They can't
Basically, yes. It's like, we're going to take you to a secret location so that you can't show others how to get here unless you're authorized to.
Wow. And now, what about the book? The moment of reckoning is upon us and finds me, if not quite insolvent, yet slightly trembling at the idea that the first installment offered may be found below the mark. The price demanded beyond my poor resources, and myself led, for the benefit of the masses, to trespass beyond the terrible, quote, hitherto shalt thou go, and no further, end quote, and the angry wave of the Chohan's wrath swamping me, blue ink and all. I finally hope you will not make me lose my situation.
All right. Hitherto shalt thou go, and no further. Again, that's from the Bible, from the book of Job, where God is talking to Job. You probably don't know the whole story. Job is the purest man in the world. And so the devil says, oh, you think he is, he believes everything that you tell him. He will do everything you say, but I bet if you test him that he will come up wanting. He'll come up short.
Put through terrible tests where his sons were killed and everything.
Yes, exactly. So God, speaking to Job, said, you can go this far, but no further. So it's a quote from the Bible, story of Job. And the Chohan's wrath. K.H. almost always wrote either in blue ink or blue pencil sometimes. And so he refers to that fact. And he also says, I fondly hope you will not make me lose my situation, in quotes, meaning my position, my job. I hope I don't lose my job.
I hope I don't get in trouble because of this.
Hope I don't get sacked here.
Yeah.
So I get the feeling.
Oh, geez.
I get the feeling that K.H. is kind of the darling of the adepts. He's one of the younger ones. I think he gets away with quite a bit, and he knows that they like him and that he can get away with stuff. I just have that feeling.
I can't wait to hear from Moria. When do we hear from him?
It will be a few months from here. Okay. I don't remember exactly which letter. That's a really fascinating part of the story here.
Okay. I have a dim notion that you will be very impatient with me, but you need not be. It is one of the unfortunate necessities of life that imperial needs do sometimes force one apparently to ignore the claims of friendship, to put off for a while the impatient expectations of neophytes as being of inferior importance. One such need that I call imperial is the need of your future welfare, the realization of the dream dreamt by you in company with Stainton Moses. That dream, shall we call it a vision, was that you and Mrs. Kingsford and the Theosophical Society. are all parts of a large plan for the manifestations of occult philosophy to the world.
So while Sinnett was in London, he was looking for helpers to help him revitalize the Theosophical Society. One of the people that he contacted was Stainton Moses. We're going to hear a whole bunch about Stainton Moses. He was a medium, had corresponded with HPB many times, apparently. In the Wikipedia page, theosophy.wiki, you can look up Stainton Moses and you'll see a bit of a biography about him, but you'll also see the photograph of a portrait that was produced phenomenally by HPB, and it has color in it, blue. And you can see it indicates his aura. So that's just a bit of information for anyone who wants to know about Stainton Moses, but we're going to hear a whole bunch about him. Mrs. Kingsford was another interesting one. She was a medical doctor. At the time, the universities in England did not allow women to obtain degrees. They could go to the university and attend classes, but they didn't give them any degrees. And so she had to go to the Sorbonne in Paris to get her degree in medicine. She was also a vegetarian and an anti-vivisectionist. And the masters liked that. They liked that she had ethics and that she cared about animals as well as people. So they had their eye on her. The difference was she was very much interested in the Egyptian mysteries and the brotherhood in Egypt as opposed to the Tibetan philosophy and the Tibetan brotherhood. So they didn't have a problem with that, but we'll find later on that it does become a problem.
Okay. Yes, the time must come, and it is not far off, when all of you will comprehend correctly the apparently contradictory phases of such manifestations, and will be forced by the evidence to reconcile them. The case not being so at present, remember, it is because we are playing a risky game, and the stakes are human souls, that I ask you to be patient. Bearing in mind that I have to look after your soul and mine too, I propose to do so at any cost, even at the risk of being misunderstood by you, as I was by Mr. Hume. The work is made all the more difficult by my being a lonely laborer in the field, and will be as long as I fail to prove to my superiors that you, at least, mean business, that you are in right good earnest.
So he is the only one among the adepts that is willing to take on this task. Everybody else is like, yeah, we don't want anything to do with that. So yeah, he's all by himself, and he has to prove himself. He's on trial himself to show that he has taken on a task that is worthwhile and that will produce results, and they're all waiting to see how well he does at that.
It's interesting how none of the older adepts want anything to do with it.
No, and they're quite wise too. We'll find out later that, they in many ways were wiser than KH was.
So I assume this is taking a toll on him in some way.
Well, he's got a lot of pressure on him.
As I am refused higher help, so will you fail to easily find help in that society in which you move, and in which you try to move. Nor will you find for a certain time much joy in those directly concerned. Our old lady is weak, and her nerves are worked to a fiddle string. So is her jaded brain. HSO is far away, and Mr. Hume, who once promised to become a champion fighter in that battle of light against darkness, he now preserves a kind of armed neutrality wondrous to behold. Having made the marvelous discovery that we are a body of antediluvian Jesuits of fossils, self-crowned with oratorical flourishes, he took a break, but then accused us of intercepting his letters to HPB. Verily has our very intellectual, once mutual friend, a flood of words at his command which would suffice to float a ship of oratorical fallacies. Never.
So he's going through the workers that they already have. HPB is kind of useless because of her ill health. Alcott is away in Sri Lanka creating Buddhist schools. And Hume, who showed promise at one point, has basically said, yeah, I'm not sure I want to get involved in this. And the last thing he did was to question whether or not the letters written to him and Sinnett were even valid. Mm-hmm. He's like, yeah, I think maybe HPB actually wrote those.
Aren't Sinnett and Hume close?
Not really. It's more by their status.
Okay. They're in the same circle.
It's not like they hang out all the time. They were quite friendly whenever he's in Shimla, because Hume lives in Shimla all year round. And Sinnett travels between Allahabad and Shimla. So whenever he's there, they are social, in the same social circle.
Nevertheless, I respect him. But who next? C.C. Massey? But then he is the hapless parent of about half a dozen illegitimate brats. Wow. He is a most charming, devoted friend, a profound mystic, a generous, noble-minded man, a gentleman, true as gold. He has every prerequisite for a student of occultism, but none for an adept.
So they're looking for, okay, who can we get to help you? You're a good candidate. He admits that. Sinnett is a good candidate. But who else? Who else are we going to get? It kind of sounds like here that they're gossiping, but in fact, they have to qualify these people. Who would be a good helper for you?
Dr. Wilde, a Christian to the bone. Hood, a sweet nature, as you say, a dreamer and an idealist in mystic matters, yet no worker. Stainton Moses, here we are. Stainton Moses has nearly upset the theosophical ark set afloat 3 years back, and he will do his level best to do it over again, our Imperator notwithstanding. You doubt me? Listen.
Listen. Who's Imperator? Stainton Moses is a natural-born medium. He's extremely receptive to any psychic impulses. A trance medium, in fact, which means he can go to sleep, basically, and the spirit on the other side can take over his body and speak using his body. But when he wakes up, he's unaware of what was said. Someone else has to report to him what was said. Imperator, he thought, was his spirit guide. But we will find out in the...
He meaning Stainton?
Stainton. But we will find out that it was apparently one of the adepts who was trying to work with him and see if he could be a good candidate to work along with the adepts, because he was receptive. Remember, that's very important. That's why HPB was such an important instrument for them. But to find somebody with ethics and who is very receptive is very difficult. Most of the spiritualists were completely out of the ballpark. they were completely useless. So they really were hoping, and apparently they were willing to invest some time trying to test him and see if they could make him into a similar instrument to HPB.
Now, what does the word imperator mean?
So imperator apparently means about the same as emperor, but it's specific to the Roman Empire. I don't know who gave the title of Imperator to this individual, but I suspect it was either Stainton Moses or one of his associates who was with him during the seances.
Mm-hmm. Continuing along, he is a weird, rare nature. His occult psychical energies are tremendous, but they have lain dormant, folded up within him and unknown to himself, when some 8 years ago or so, Imperator threw his eye upon him and bid his spirit soar. Wait, I thought the Imperator is Moses.
No, Imperator is what he thinks is the spirit guide, but is in fact one of the adepts.
Okay, I was mistaken. Since then, a new life has been in him, a dual existence. But his nature could not be changed. Brought up as a theological student, his mind was devoured by doubts. Earlier, he betook himself to Mount Athos in Greece, where, shutting himself in a monastery, he studied Greek Eastern religion, and it is there that he was first noticed by his, quote, spirit guide. Of course, Greek casuistry failed to solve his doubts, and he hurried on to Rome, popery satisfying him as little. From there, he wandered to Germany with the same negative results. Giving up dry Christian theology, he did not give up its presumable founder with all that. He needed an ideal, and he found it in the latter. For him, Jesus is a reality, a once embodied, now a disembodied spirit who, quote, furnished him with an evidence of his personal identity, end quote. He thinks in no less a degree than other spirits, Imperator among the rest, have. Nevertheless, neither the religions of Jesus nor yet his words as recorded in the Bible and believed by Stainton Moses to be authentic are fully accepted by that restless spirit of his. Imperator, on whom the same fate passed later on, fares no better. His mind is too receptive. Once impressed, it becomes easier to delete characters engraved on titanium than impressions made upon his brain. Wow.
All right. What does casuistry mean?
Using unfounded or false arguments to justify something, usually of an ethical or moral nature.
All right, so casuistry was used 140 years ago. Maybe 50 years ago, we would say specious argument. Today, we would say putting a spin on it.
Now, if this is actually an adept, this Imperator, this is another instance of a communication between a master and a person directly.
Yes, we're going to see. He's going to be tested, and we'll see what the result is of that testing.
Whenever he is under the influence of Imperator, he is all alive to the realities of occultism and the superiority of our science over spiritualism. As soon as he is left alone and under the pernicious guidance of those who he believes have communed with disembodied souls, all becomes confusion again. His mind will yield to no suggestions, no reasonings but his own, and those are all for spiritualistic theories. When the old theological fetters had dropped off, he imagined himself a free man. Months later, he became the humble slave and tool of the spirits. It is but when standing face to face with his inner self that he realizes the truth that there is something higher and nobler than the prittle-prattle of pseudo-spirits. It was at such a moment that he heard for the first time the voice of Imperator, and it was, as he himself puts it, as if the voice of God was speaking to his inner self. That voice has made itself familiar to him for years, and yet he very often heeds it not. A simple question: if Imperator were what he believes, in fact knows him to be, wouldn't he have made Stainton Moses' will completely subservient to his own by this time? Only the adepts are forbidden by our wise to subject to themselves another and a weaker will. The former mode of proceeding is the favorite one resorted to by the brothers of the shadow. Well, that's the first time we've heard that. The sorcerers, the elementary spooks, and as an isolated exception, by the highest planetary spirits, those who can no longer err.
Yeah, we better look into some of these things here. All right, so Stainton Moses is very easy to influence. That part is good. But he's also very wishy-washy. When Imperator is the one who is trying to influence him, he sees everything clearly. He's on board. He's completely in agreement with everything that he's being taught. But as soon as Imperator is out of the picture, he goes back to his old ways of thinking. And he gets all confused because he can't reconcile his previous ways of thinking with what is being transmitted to him by Imperator. And then he says here, he mentions the brothers of the shadow, and you're right, this is the first time we've heard of that. So the adepts are not allowed to influence somebody to the point that they take over their mind and force them. They can plant suggestions, they can give information, but they're not allowed. Remember in the previous letter, he said to Hume, or in one of them, if you allowed me to, within 24 hours, I would completely control your mind and you would have no idea that I had done that. The adepts are not allowed to do that. The brothers of the shadow are the antithesis of the adepts. They have no scruples. They have no morals. They don't have a hierarchy to speak of because it's each one for himself. And they look only for power.
There probably are groups, though, huh? Like small groups.
Exactly. They're, like I mentioned once before, evil people will work together as long as I get something out of it.
Of course.
If it's beneficial to me, I'm in. If someone else disses me, or if they become too powerful at my expense, then all bets are off. I'm not helping with that. It's very selfishly motivated, but they have no scruples. That's the biggest problem. They also try to bring down the adepts. They don't like the fact that there is good in the world when they're trying to promote their evil plans.
This is very interesting. Are there any names that we would be familiar with of these brothers of the shadow?
The devil, Beelzebub, generic names, but no, they would never give them that satisfaction to put a name to one of them.
Interesting. But these appear on Earth only at the origin of every new humankind.
Now here he's talking about the highest planetary spirit.
Oh, okay. Sure,
so he's saying there is one exception to this rule of not taking over someone's mind, and that is the planetary spirit, but at a very particular point in time. Now, who is the planetary spirit?
The Lord of the world?
Yes. And
not the Mahachohan, some much higher.
It's way, way, way above that. And it's not necessarily one person. It can be a group of individuals in the spiritual hierarchy who work as a unit. We know very little about them, at least I do. Somebody knows more about them. But they are comprise what would be our closest concept of what a god would be for our world.
Well, there's also the solar spirit.
Yes.
That's considered a god-like being as
right.
well.
But as far as being personally connected
To
with
Earth,
our
sure,
planet,
sure, yeah.
this would be the closest. And so we're going to find out at what point he would be able to take over people's minds.
Only at the origin of every new humankind. Interesting. That's very interesting. And they, he's calling him or
See?
it a they.
Yeah, exactly.
And they remain with man no longer than the time required for the eternal truths they teach to impress themselves so forcibly upon the plastic minds of the new races as to guarantee them from being lost or forgotten in ages hereafter by the forthcoming generations.
So, at the very beginning of humanity on a planet, they, the gods, Elohim in Hebrew, come into incarnation, so to speak, and they teach this new humanity the truths as far as they can convey that kind of information. It is obvious that they teach it in the form of stories, parables.
You know how interesting this is, Terry? If this information was more exoteric, this would solve all of the questions of why certain similarities exist between, for example, the Mayans and the Egyptians. How are there pyramids on the Americas and pyramids and the Göbekli Tepe prophecies and Stonehenge, all these ancient cultures? There was only one.
All of them, yeah.
Yes, of course. There is only one ancient wisdom at the beginning of all.
Exactly.
And people physically moved to different parts of the world, but there was only one at the very beginning.
Exactly.
I wish that people knew about this. This makes so much sense.
That's our job.
My goodness. I need to call Graham Hancock. I'm not sure. Have you heard of Graham Hancock? He's at the forefront of researching ancient civilizations, and he's been very vocal on all media lately. But he doesn't know this.
No.
He doesn't.
Yeah, maybe he'll see our videos.
Maybe. Yeah. The mission of the Planetary Spirit is to strike the key note of truth. Once he has directed the vibration of the latter to run its course uninterruptedly along the links of that race, and to the end of the cycle, the denizen of the highest inhabited sphere disappears from the surface of our planet until the following, quote, resurrection of flesh, end quote.
So basically, I'm assuming the end of time, so to speak. So he appears at the very beginning and then disappears, in a sense, until some great future event in the future, which he refers to as the resurrection of flesh. And I'm not sure what that means.
The vibrations of the primitive truth are what your philosophers name innate ideas. Now, the resurrection of flesh. Do you recall when I interviewed Joel Rigetti, the Christian pastor,
Right.
and we were discussing Christian views on reincarnation? She mentioned that there is actually a not often talked about concept in the Bible about actual bodies being reanimated. It's not talked about much, but because we were talking about different ideas of reincarnation and what that could mean. Resurrection of flesh, I mean, that's saying right there, flesh being resurrected. That's bizarre.
Yes, it is. Now we're going to get to the point where Stainton Moses is going to be tested.
Now, what actually did Sinnett ask that's prompting all this?
They were discussing who he was going to recruit to
Okay.
be one of his co-workers.
Okay, and so KH is vetting all potential people.
Exactly.
And then, but how did we get on the subject? Because he kind of went off on a rabbit
Yes, he
trail.
did, and he's going to do it more than once.
But I'm glad he did because we need to hear this.
No,
This
we're getting some real information now.
Yeah. Thanks, KH. All right, so another paragraph, and I guess we're maybe halfway through. No, we're not even close to halfway through yet. My goodness, of this letter. Okay, Writing to HPB from the Isle of Wight in 1876.
That's a pretty good sized island on the south coast, off the south coast of England.
Okay. Of a vision he had that lasted for over 48 consecutive hours, and during which he walked about, talked as usual, but did not preserve the slightest remembrance of anything external. He asks her to tell him whether it was a vision or a hallucination. Why did he not ask Imperator? You can tell me, for you were there, he says, at another time.
There he's talking about HPB,
Okay.
saying, you can tell me whether or not this actually happened because you were there.
Okay. He says, at another time he saw her in his own library looking at him, approaching and giving him some Masonic signs of the lodge he knows. He admits that he, quote, saw her as clearly as he saw Massey, who was there. He saw her on several other occasions, and sometimes, knowing it was HPB, he could not recognize her. You seem to me, from your appearance, as from your letters, so different at times, the mental attitude so various, that it is quite conceivable to me that you are a bundle of entities. I have absolute faith in you. In every letter of his, he clamored for a, quote, living brother. To her unequivocal statement that there was one already in charge of him, he strongly objected. When helped to get free from his too material body, absent from it for hours and days sometimes, his empty vehicle operated during that period from afar and by external living influence. As soon as he was back, he would begin laboring under the deep-rooted impression of having been all that time the vehicle for another intelligence, a disembodied, not an embodied spirit, truth never once flashing across his mind. He says there should be no real antagonism between the medium and the adept. Had he used the word seer instead of medium, the idea would have been rendered more correctly. For a man becomes rarely an adept without being born a natural seer.
Now wait, what did he say?
That's very, very interesting. Again, there's so many references to the Yoga Sutras here, but let's read that again. He says there should be no real antagonism between the medium and the adept. Had he used the word seer instead of medium, the idea would have been rendered more correctly. For a man becomes rarely an adept without being born a natural seer.
Yeah, so
we need to be born with clairvoyance and receptivity.
Yes, at least the ability to develop it.
Right. And it stands to reason that certain lifetimes we would be born as seers and not reach adeptship, of course, because of hundreds of lifetimes. But in the lifetime that one reaches adepthood, that lifetime they are either a natural born seer, well, it's not always natural, it's by work, or they have the ability to develop it themselves. And isn't it interesting, the word seer is exactly what Patanjali uses to refer to the student of yoga. The seer is established in his own essential nature when he learns to focus and calm the mind. That's your natural state.
Yeah, seer, one who sees.
One who sees.
Most of us are blind. We don't realize it, but we're completely blind to anything that is not in the physical world. So the more perceptive, the more aware, and the more sensitive we are to these much higher vibrations, the faster we will progress. And we can't become an adept without developing that.
The veils that are covering our vision are there for a reason, for the very specific reason that we need to learn to remove them ourselves.
Being cribbed, cabined, and confined to force us to gain experience.
To gain experience and to learn how to go beyond, break our shackles, so to speak, on our own.
Right. So encasing yourself in concrete is the worst thing you can do. Yes, we have to be confined, but not forever. At some point, it behooves us to break that shell and expand our consciousness into the next level.
Even though being in the concrete might feel safe, it might feel protected, it might feel familiar, but it certainly isn't expansive, and there's certainly more out there beyond the...
Right. But it takes faith, and it takes... Bravery, courage to do that.
Intellect.
It takes faith in yourself, that you have what it takes. Many people don't want to be responsible for that. They say, you tell me what I can do and what I can't do.
I don't want that responsibility.
Exactly.
I want to be, exactly. I'd rather go to church on Sunday and I'll pay my tithing. I'll say, yes, Jesus died for me and I'm going to be okay. Cool. That's all I want.
And that works up until a certain point, but then it no longer works. And that's true at every stage along the way. It works for a while, and then it stops working. And then you have to ask yourself, what's the next step? Because obviously I need to go farther beyond what I know right now.
Again, in September 1875, he knew nothing of the Brothers of the Shadow, our greatest, most cruel, and our most potent enemies. In that year, he actually asked the old lady whether Bulwer had been eating underdone pork chops and dreaming when he described that hideous dweller of the threshold. Make yourself ready, she answered. In about 12 months' time, you will have to face and fight with them. In October 1876, they had begun their work on him. I am fighting, he wrote, a hand-to-hand battle with all the legions of the fiend for the past 3 weeks. My nights are made hideous with their torments, temptations, and foul suggestions. I see them all around, glaring at me, gabbling, howling, grinning. Every form of filthy suggestion, of bewildering doubt, of mad and shuddering fear is upon me. I can understand Zanoni's dweller now. The dweller, they're quoting this dweller on the threshold.
Yes.
I have not wavered yet, and their temptations are fainter, the presence less near, the horror less. We need to describe this dweller on the threshold.
What is this dweller on the threshold? It's from a book by, remember we talked about Lord Lindsay, who Sinnett had gone to visit while he was in London. Lord Lindsay's father was a famous writer, Bulwer Lytton. And he wrote many different novels, but one of them was called Zanoni. And I just happen to have a copy of it. Zanoni was the story of an adept, but his version of it. He somehow had a concept of superhumans.
Now, was he involved physically with the society, or was this long before? What year?
He wasn't completely involved with the society itself, but he had ideas. Obviously, he had intuited some aspects of the adepts and who they were. So he wrote novels that depicted what he envisioned them, kind of like H.G. Wells in the 19th, I guess, I don't know when exactly H.G. Wells lived, but he also had lots of visions about supermen who had lived or would live on Earth.
Is this text, this Zanoni, considered a theosophical writing?
Not really, no. Here's a copy of the title page. He had gotten some ideas, obviously, from theosophical writings, but he wasn't involved with the Theosophical Society. Anyway, he wasn't accurate either, but K.H. is saying that his description of the dweller of the threshold...
Dweller on...
Well, here he said dweller of the threshold, but it's usually referred to as dweller on the threshold. He is saying that he was quite accurate in describing that. And the dweller on the threshold comes at a certain point in a person's spiritual development when all of their worst nature comes to the forefront, and the demons and devils that were created by them over the centuries come to haunt him, so to speak, and to test him. So it's kind of like your higher nature on one side and the devil on the other side, and the story of Job, which one is going to win?
And the dweller is you, is
Yes,
him.
exactly.
And the threshold is what? Entering where?
Onto the path and being safely on the path. This is the point where
the door which closes fast.
Exactly. Yeah. So, very good description of that.
Wouldn't it stand to reason, though, that this occurrence would have this fight would happen multiple times on the path, though? Because entering the path is one thing, but then being tested later is another. Would they both be this process of dweller on the threshold?
There seems to be, as far as I can tell, only one if you pass it. If you don't pass it, obviously it's going to happen again later at some point.
In HPB's poem, that it refers to starting on the path.
It's hard to say if this is exactly that point.
Sure.
At some point along the way, the person will be tested.
Yes.
And the main thing to keep in mind is that these are on the astral plane. These are thoughts. And like we said before, these thoughts can't harm you unless you physically react to the idea. And then it can cause physical trouble. But as long as you keep in mind and are clear that this is something that exists on the astral plane,
A battle.
an image, it's an illusion, completely an illusion.
But it feels real.
But it feels real. So you have to keep your wits about you and realize, hey, there's nothing this demon can do to harm me.
There's a concept that gets thrown around in some yoga circles, referred to as the dark night of the soul.
That's a very similar thing, yes.
Okay, continuing along. One night she had prostrated herself before her superior, one of the few they fear, praying him to wave his hand across the ocean, lest Stainton Moses should die and the Theosophical Society lose its best subject. He must be tried, was the answer. He imagines that Imperator had sent the tempters because he, Stainton Moses, was one of those doubting Thomases who must see for himself. He would not believe that Imperator could not help their coming. Watch over him he did, but he could not drive them away unless the victim, the neophyte himself, proved the strongest. But did these human fiends in league with the elementaries prepare him for a new life as he thought they would? Embodiments of those adverse influences which beset the inner self struggling to be free and to progress, they would never have returned had he successfully conquered them by asserting his own independent will, by giving up his mediumship, his passive will. Yet they did return.
And what does that mean?
He was being tested again.
He failed the test. So one night, she, meaning HPB, had prostrated herself before her superior, I'm assuming her Mahatma, Moria, one of the few that they, the demons, feared, praying him to wave his hand across the ocean lest Stainton Moses should die and the Theosophical Society lose its best subject. So even HPB was begging him, please make it stop. And he said, he has to be tested. We can't make this stop, or else we have no idea whether he can pass the test. We all have to be tested at some point. So what I mentioned before, be very careful about raising your hand and say, hey, yeah, I want to be one of them. This is what you're up against. So make sure that you have what it takes. And most people who say, yeah, I want to do it, are not going to get this far. you'll be eliminated for numerous other reasons before you get to the point where the dweller on the threshold comes into play. That's probably a good point, a good place to stop for today.
Agreed.
It is exciting, though.
We're finally getting some very, very deep teachings.
And it gets even deeper. We've got some really good information in this letter number 18.
We'll keep going next session. I guess we'll wrap up there.
Yes.
All right. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.